Good morning and welcome to another ironic introduction to another video. Today I'm going to be talking Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda with Ebony Maw. I kind of want to do this thing where I take subpar champions, I go through their abilities, kind of their playstyle mechanics, and I talk about, small tweaks that could make the champion good and kind of keep it, canon so that we're not like adding, fury buffs to Ebony Maw because that doesn't make sense. And so first things first, if you already know all his abilities, you know how he works out, I'll put a timestamp in the description. Go ahead and skip ahead to when I start theory crafting. But for those of you who don't know what this guy does, let me go through his abilities as quickly as I possibly can. He does have a longer list here, so I will do it quickly. So his awakened ability is when an opponent misses, they are inflicted with a degeneration passive, dealing barely any damage over 4 seconds. Each time Ebony Maw nullifies a buff or activates a special attack, he places 1 deterioration passive on his opponent. When Ebony Maw inflicts his opponent with a degeneration, all deterioration passives are consumed, each adding 43.57 damage to the degeneration. So the degeneration goes from 63 to 40 to 100 total. And if you had 20 deterioration passives, you could bring it from 63 to a little over 900, like 920. So that is a pretty big, massive scale up, but you'll see later on why that's not that big of a deal. Deterioration passives last indefinitely until consumed, and each reduce the potency of opponent's Fury's effect by a flat 5%, stacking up to a maximum of 20 times. Ebony Maw has 3 missions to complete. Just like all of the Thanos minions, he has missions as well as persistent charges. Completing all 3 missions in a single fight grants Ebony Maw 1 persistent charge up to a maximum of 6. Each time he completes a mission, he inflicts the opponent with a degeneration passive, dealing 63.4 damage over 4 seconds. And when the fight starts, Ebony Maw inflicts the opponent with 1 deterioration passive for every persistent charge. Some massive damage coming through there. Mission 1, nullify a buff from the opponent. Mission 2, cause the opponent to lose power. And Mission 3, cause the opponent to falter and miss. Excuse me. So you can actually do both missions 2 and missions 3 at the same time. Just on the first falter, you can hold a heavy attack, let them attack into you, and then proc your heavy attack. That will both cause them to lose power and they will have faltered, so that's 2 missions. And with the Cull Obsidian synergy, which is when you hold heavy attack for a prolonged period of time, you give the opponent a fury buff that gives them 0 attack rating. So, it's not actually a benefit, it's just a fury buff. And then you utilize your special 1 right away in order to nullify that buff. And that's how you do all 3 missions. Fairly easy, fairly simple. His passive is if the opponent doesn't have class advantage, Ebony Maw causes all guaranteed critical hits to miss. This is known as the Corvus Slayer. I think that canonically makes sense. It's neat that he kind of was like tactically able to counter his own allies, as well as like kind of works a little bit against Ghost, but she can just not phase for the most part. Ebony Maw's first light attack is the only basic hit to make contact with the opponent. That means that he is great for Psychic Thorns, as well as can only be parried on his first light attack. So that mechanic is actually really neat. I do like having that for Ebony Maw. His heavy attacks, landing a heavy attack steals all of the opponent's power gain buffs and 10% of their current power. This is neat, particularly notable against like Hyperion. It is tough to think of like other people that this would be repeatedly good for, but for Hyperion, this would be really nice. And then Persuasive Voice. This one's the doozy. If he isn't focused, he begins focusing on the opponent's mind for 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, he's focused and starts persuading the opponent. It takes twice as long if he's under the effect of a non-damaging debuff. Once focused, the opponent gains 1 persuasion every 0.7 seconds, going up to a maximum of 100. And do note that when struck by an opponent's heavy or special attack 3, his focus is broken. For every 20 persuasion the opponent gains, they are inflicted with a falter passive lasting 3 seconds, increasing to 5 seconds against cosmics. Enemies inflicted with falter have a 100% chance to miss. This is how you utilize that miss mechanic for the mission. At 100 persuasion, the opponent is persuaded and inflicted with a black tongue passive, reducing power gain from all sources by 30%. Black Tongue is not affected by ability accuracy and lasts for the duration of the fight. While Black Tongue is active, the opponent is inflicted with 1 deterioration passive every 6 seconds. So, after 120 seconds, they have that maximum 20 deterioration passive for really big damage coming through, 920 damage. Continuing on, special attack 1. When activated, each hit nullifies 1 fury, cruelty, or precision buff from his opponent. This is how you can activate mission 1. And expands to all buffs if the opponent is inflicted with Black Tongue. That part is actually pretty convenient. If no buffs were nullified during this attack, the opponent gains a fury buff, increasing their attack rating by 0 for 6 seconds. Again, you can see that's really just to give them that fury buff. So you can, remove it. Special 2 inflicts the opponent with a generation passive, dealing 63.4 damage over 4 seconds. So once you've utilized all your convenient ways to inflict them with the generation passive, this is how you remove the deterioration passives going forward. When you're like 45 seconds into the fight and then you've been waiting 40 seconds for deterioration passives to stack, you can get a nice special 2 in for some solid damage. Solid damage. Special attack 3. Ebony Maw reaches into his opponent's mind, depleting all their current power, gaining 35% of the power depleted for himself over the next 4 seconds. That ability actually is really good and very solid, but unfortunately, the rest of his damage doesn't keep up. So I don't want to make the statement like, oh, just increase the numbers of damage, right? Because that is a very simplified solution, and that actually makes it kind of hard to balance characters because stats alone isn't necessarily the answer. So I think that there are some minor tweaks to the phrasing of these abilities that could put Ebony Maw in a good place. That said, timestamp, that's for me in the future. So I think my first thing that I really want to comment on is the deterioration's passives, right? It lasts indefinitely until consumed. I think that just make it so it lasts indefinitely, period, right? So it can stack up to 20 times and it's indefinite. In this regard, Ebony Maw would actually be able to get that max a little over 920 damage every time he degenerates the opponent. And it's not a lot of damage, so being able to build up deterioration passives over time and be rewarded on each degeneration makes it feel good. It makes it feel a little bit stronger, and that that's actually a sizable increase in damage over the duration of the fight and in use, and it doesn't require changing any of the numbers. It's just a matter of making it so deteriorations aren't consumed upon degenerating. And I think that's a really good way to utilize those deterioration passives, as well as reward players for utilizing him in longer fights, which is where I think he becomes more relevant, right? Like he scales up, and if you can make it through the first 100 seconds, suddenly you're dealing, an additional 900 damage on each special too. That said, I think I would actually like to see a degeneration on his heavy attack. I just think that, it would be really nice to have an additional way to degenerate. A special 2 alone isn't enough, or maybe just put that degeneration on all of his specials so he can be rewarded in that regard. Having more consistent ways to apply degeneration would be convenient, or specifically with when the opponent misses an attack, they are inflicted with the degeneration passive. Another option here is to look at this persuasion here. And so the issue with this persuasion, which it's an amazing mechanic, absolutely fun, have a blast doing this in the arena, is that once you hit 100 persuasion, you no longer generate that falter, so you can't proc degenerations from having the opponent miss into you once you actually want them to. Like, you get the most value out of that when you have Black Tongue passive active and the opponent, is now building up a deterioration passive every 6 seconds, and this is when you want them to punch into you so they can degenerate. So in this regard, I think make it so the Black Tongue passive maybe isn't permanent, right? So at 100 persuasion, the opponent is persuaded and inflicted with the Black Tongue passive that lasts 25 seconds, right? And then this way, persuasion can actually reset, right? And then it wouldn't be a full uptime, right? Because at 0.7 seconds to gain 100 persuasion, this would take 70 seconds? Yeah, I don't need to do the calculator. If my math is wrong there, which I don't think it is, but 70 seconds, right? If you make that a 35-second uptime, that would mean 50% of the time they're picking up those extra deterioration passives, and it stacks up all the way. That's pretty reasonable. If it's 1 deterioration passive every 6 seconds, that would mean over the course of the 35 seconds, it would be 6 deterioration passives, right? So you're getting a controlled amount. And that would be a minor change to the ability that I think would also add a lot of core strength, because the falter mechanic is really what makes Ebony Maw so great. Because if you time that falter properly, you can completely avoid specials, you can completely avoid, you know, very, very meaningful damage, but also proc, like this is your convenient way of reprocking degeneration over time. And then that said, I don't think you need to add much more to the specials 1, 2, and 3. So in this manner, just like these small changes, they very quickly take him from this wet noodle to this like maybe mildly cooked noodle, or slightly dry noodle that maybe poked you in the wrong eye socket. I don't think that these changes by any means would take him to God tier. I think that what these changes would do would be, without changing the numbers of his damage, right? Without making his basic attacks deal more damage, it would make the degenerations feel powerful, right? Because they would be. You would be getting about 1,000 damage every time you degenerate. It would be really cool if you falter, right? And your opponent does like a six shot, you know, gunshot into your degeneration. That's 6 misses, right? And now they're degenerating 6,000. You know, that's actually like a really sizable chunk amount of damage that you can get just by timing the falter properly. And then you're rewarded for playing clean, because he is incredibly squishy, and I feel like glass cannons or glass champions deserve to be rewarded with a damage output. And I just feel like this would take him and put him in a very good place overall. It may be overtuned, right? Maybe these tips would overtune him too much, and maybe you don't need to do them all. But I think that this would be a very good option for him. So that said, normally I would like to do gameplay of him, but I've actually tried multiple times. He's just so bad that I really can't get any decent gameplay of him. And part of that's on me. I'm not a good enough player to bring him into high enough PI opponents where they don't die, you know, before I can get the deterioration passives to stack up to show you. / they're either too weak and I accidentally kill them, or they're too strong and I die. So that said, it's just theory crafting today, but this video has gone on longer than it needs to, so I will talk to you later.